Next speaker, Stephen Paulson, is the founder, owner, and currently the CEO of Conservation Seeding and Restoration, Inc., a wildlife restoration company with 4 regional offices working throughout the western U.S. Stephen has a BS in rangeland ecology and watershed management from the University of Wyoming and has been actively restoring landscapes with a native-only approach for 15 years. Please welcome Steve.
Oil and gas, right? Yep, that's the one. Oil and gas. Everybody's familiar with oil and gas restoration in Idaho, right? Nothing to it. All right, so is everybody ready for the day to be closer to done than it is? All right, I'm going to do my level best to keep you engaged a little bit. My conversation actually is going to be shorter than it might have been otherwise, just given that a lot of the speakers that you've had in front of you already today have covered a lot of the topics that I wanted to talk about. Maybe that means that the topics we want to talk about with regard to native seed challenges are, pretty simplistic in their, blocky form. They're all the same. Everybody's got a few issues out there floating around. I chose oil and gas because that's the lion's share of my familiarity with regard to seed and seed availability. I think it's important. One of the things that hasn't been spoken about much today with regard to native seed and surface use is that the BLM is certainly the largest buyer. But has anybody ever considered who the second largest buyer is? Who we've got, there we go. There's lots of stuff happening, but I couldn't hear anything. All right, so some of that comes from heavy equipment use over the years too. Short story long, oil and gas is uniquely required to do something a little different than the BLM is, and that is they have to be successful with their wildland restoration efforts if they want to maintain use of the land. Think that through for a minute. So the BLM and your state agencies, all those guys out there, yeah, man, they're buying millions of pounds of seed, they're putting them out there. What happens if it doesn't work? Oh, man, what a downer. If it doesn't work, there's a lot of frustrated people, but there's no bone to take away. We just do it again. It's something to consider maybe with how we think about the process moving forward, and I've heard some exciting things in that capacity so far today. I'm pretty intrigued, and I can't wait to talk with you more. All right, so difficulties in obtaining appropriate volumes and species of seed. This plagues everybody in the industry. It doesn't matter who you are. My company happens to be a grower of seed and plants, and we also install. So there's a lot of vertical integration in our concept. That said, we have a good, kind of very clear understanding of the processes it takes to go from A to B to C and actually get something on the ground. I think it goes without saying that everybody values native applications. They love it. The concept is infallible, really. Just our application of it is a little fouled up from time to time. But the idea that putting back what was is certainly a good idea. Nobody really challenges that very often. The issue comes in with our kind of capitalistic concepts around making it functional. So we've talked a lot about function with regard to the landscape. And we've talked a lot about function with regard to seed and how to move seed from A to B and how we acquire it, sell it, transmit it, transport it, have very ridiculously confused seed laws across state lines in the western United States. And by that I mean ridiculously confused. There's so much gray area inside of the seed laws for native seed moving across state lines. In fact, I would challenge anybody to make an argument that would stand up in court. Every lawyer on the planet could make a happy living making a defense in this case. It's ridiculous. Okay. Environmental factors that are challenges for us with regard to seed expansion, native seed use, and native seed concepts at large. Climate and precip, already been talked about. Grazing, already been talked about. Fire, we've talked about it. Depredation, haven't heard much on that one. How many people in the room have ever tried to collect Fritillaria pudica? Anybody? Nobody? Anybody? So yellow bells, little yellow bells. If you've tried to collect it, you'll know that you have to stand guard over it with a 12 gauge. because it's so palatable and so sought after by almost anything that eats a plant that it's awesome. And that includes people, by the way. If you've never eaten any of it on a salad, you're cheating yourself, really. It's good stuff. Ethnobotany is real. All right, so noxious and invasive weeds. Here's a challenge. We've talked about it in certain contexts. We haven't talked about it in a context of actually producing and having available wildland collected seed sources. Consider this. How many intact seed collection sites that are exclusive of cheatgrass can you think of? So there was none that came from the crowd. Maybe the cloud. Does anybody else have problems with Google? Seriously. Okay. All right. From time to time, documentation transfer through the cloud is sometimes perplexing. All right. Anyway, it should be noted that it's difficult to find places that you can actually collect pure seed. And even if you're really good at it, and I'm proud of my team, we're really good at it. No modesty there. The reality is, even if you're really good at it, a zero occurrence is unobtainable in large part. I mean, it can happen, but holy mackerel, let me tell you. They do make allowances for it, but I would say that as the land mass continues to move from a biomass perspective, from marginally intact systems to more disturbed systems as we move through more and more fire cycle, which seems to be promoting the need but degrading the availability, there might be some sliding scales to consider there with regard to cost as we move forward with the effort. All that, when you correlate back to some of the talks we've heard before, where we know now that the spend is going to go down. So where do we lean for the spend to go up? Well, we're going to lean on private industry yet again. I'm not from the government, and I can help, right? It's a different concept. But we're going to lean on private industry because private industry is going to be forced to comply with regulations that the regulators don't. Harvesting and production challenges. This is something that we don't talk about a lot as seed producers because everybody has their method. There's always some secret. I like secrets. If you want to share all of your secrets with me, that would be fine. I'll be in the back of the room as soon as I'm done. But with regard to seed collection, seed grow out, seed genetics, plant habit, plant function, these things are remarkably confused inside of the native world. And I have yet to meet very many native plants that, reliably produce the opportunity to take their germ, right? And so there's a lot of unique issues, and we grow a lot of different things. We do a lot of different things, and we've got a lot of different expansion projects. But I think it should be noted that inside of the cost structures that you look at, wildland collections are uniquely challenged in their applicability. So to put things in perspective, we've talked a lot about landscape level restoration projects. Let's sprinkle in a little more confusion. From an oil and gas perspective, we're now talking about, I don't know, 60,000 surface disturbances scattered across 7 western states. Each of those disturbances range between 1 and 25 acres. Restore that, right? Islands of restoration versus large tracts of restoration. Think about those issues now in context to genetic source, which we know is a valuable, very valuable concept, right? But how do you make an economically, so to confuse it one more step, how do you, as a seed grower, have an economically viable production plan around genetic source that disparate? That's remarkably challenging. There is help and there is hope. I heard it today. Oh, man, we get to match slides and everything. We steal one of your slides. All right, maybe I should probably look at my slide and make sure. So let's see. Everybody knows that these things are hard to cultivate and grow, or can be. Specifically in row crop cultivation, there are some unique challenges that don't readily, rear their heads with things like, I don't know, crested wheatgrass and Siberian wheatgrass. Those things we're pretty handy at. A lot of what we do is remarkably unpredictable in that regard. So Yep, there we go. Limited market. So there's just not a lot of people that specialize in native seed. I don't know exactly how many small farmers there are or even large farmers there are that grow cereal grains across the United States, but I can tell you that the native seed growers and native seed collectors are dwarfed in number by that consideration. So when we hear about native seed, and we hear about it in context or comparison to traditional agricultural scenarios, try to put it in context of volume. It's just not comparable. Growing native seed is at this point not just a science, but truly an art. And to have enough of it to be reliable, predictable, and dependable with regard to product delivery, timing, tags, all those confusing state lines and laws. Native seed growing has unique challenges away from traditional agricultural concepts, and yet we're challenged to consider it in that capacity, I think, from time to time. And I think it's important to know. Now, as the cost goes up, the use goes down. That's an undeniable fact, unless it's mandated. So it's mandated that we actually restore public land surface disturbance on multiple use land with natives. That's directive. Is that an accurate statement? Can I get a regulator to tell me that that's right? I can't. So is it wrong? You don't have to use natives? There's
always outs, if available, economically.
Sure, oh yeah. But the sentence starts with you've got to use them. And then, of course, you know, the lawyer's got a hold of it. But it starts there. And I think that that's fair. But it's good to know that it starts there. Maybe that's sometimes where the conflicts start to come into play with regard to concept. But we'll leave those alone for another day. I just think it's important that everybody understand that your standard economic models with regard to small business, providing native seed to larger endeavors, right? Inside of a standard economic model, this would be accurate. Costs go up, use goes down, cost goes down, use goes up. You make it more affordable, people can use it, it's malleable, they can get a hold of it, it's good stuff. Our market doesn't work like that. So, you've seen this slide before. Awesome. I thought that was really ironic when I saw this earlier. Anyway, short story long, what I want to point out, in this slide, in a very blocky format, you can see that there is, in fact, a pretty large incentive and has been a transition in the 2000s of moving towards native use. Let's just keep it topical. There's all kinds of ways to parse that, and there's lots of arguments that could be made. But there's certainly been an effort put forward to utilize more than less native germ on surface disturbance with regard to BLM. As things have progressed. We've learned a lot, and that's good. Some of it's reactionary. People get tired of getting sued. You know, that's kind of like getting hit with a bat. No one likes to get hit with a bat too many times. So at some point you just say, okay, what's it take to not get hit with a bat? Use native seeds. Perfect. Let's do that. All right. So sometimes that comes into play, and that's where we go with it. I think a bit of a side note from seed, it's important to note that the restoration paradigm is moving in a big way with regard to success and the use of natives. Now the reason, in my very biased opinion, that that's happening is because there are in fact surface users that have to be successful in order to maintain their business model as they move forward. And so there's been a concerted effort primarily out of Utah and Wyoming and Colorado to specifically start to carve out and identify ways that companies, private companies, have been more than less successful and are shrinking timelines for restoration success using native plants. The data lives. Now, the biggest paradigm shift in wildland restoration technology falls in the way of enterprise database systems, which is tied to geospatial data. But we now have so much data available to us, we can't manipulate it. We can't even ask questions of it. And so you've heard of several, in fact, disparate database systems that are, in fact, enterprise database systems. There are efforts being put forward now through academia that are going to start compiling more and more of those disjunct enterprise databases and putting them into a more and more palatable, easier to manipulate dashboard scenario that we all know and love. Kind of like going to McDonald's and ordering a number one, right? I need to know in this space, this ESD, this disturbance, wherever that may be, I want to go there. I want to click on a button and I want something to pop up that's a culmination of all the available data. Wouldn't that be a unique concept? It's happening. And you're seeing it happen here in these conversations, but it's still disparate in these conversations. It's hard to grasp and hard to reach because it's so large. But trust me when I tell you it's happening. Dr. Pete Stahl is actually in charge of some of that out of the University of Wyoming with regard to all of the oil and gas data that CSR has created over a decade, for instance, and we have a lot of other cooperators as well. So there's hope. I think it's important to note, and it's been touched on but not beat up, so I'm going to beat on it just a little bit. We learn as we go. Well, that's a good thing. From a market stability standpoint, that's a challenging thing. When there's the next best plant variety that comes out from a grower's perspective, it's almost instant heartburn because we now have to get expansion seed in production, grow out, stabilization, probably second year seed collection with low viability, wheat plants, young plants. Third year we finally get into some harvestable seed, but now we've gone through 3 years and guess what? There's a new player. And the regulators are doing their level best to play back and forth with regard to the players at hand, the available sources that are out there. But they know and they desperately want to be successful. And so they want the best thing. And as growers, we invest years, acres, water, time, labor, material, you name it. We're 4 years into the deal, and it shifts. Build an economic model around that and create stability. So one of the coolest things that I heard today, and one of the truest things I heard today, is that if we actually want to see some stability inside of the market space and you want to promote native plant restoration and native seed availability, period, in the Intermountain West, that big mean line that went through there, that 2.7 million pound average buy, a guarantee, right? Now you've created a market that's legitimate because almost nobody can respond to this. And your cost fluctuations inside of this buy power are this side of insanity. And so you can't blame somebody that went 4 years without selling a thing for selling it 7 times more value when it finally shows up and it's got 10 times less worth, right? These things where they're viable for long periods of time, in context, things like sagebrush, not so much. But, you know, if you put it on the shelf and it doesn't sell, it's very difficult to part company with it and call it trash, right? Well, all right, we didn't sell this year's sagebrush collection, so, you know, let's get rid of it. Perfect. That's hard for a small business to do because your banker lent you dollars against that inventory value. You worked against it. You had it. So what I want to bring to mind is just the functionality inside of the economic models that we're discussing. It is on a big scale feasible. On a small scale, when you actually get down to the individuals doing it, it becomes much more difficult. And the hybridization of these companies, right, is almost mandatory to keep the concept alive with regard to native seed delivery. Of the people that are doing native seed, there are not very many that are native seed exclusive. They do it as a bonus round because you can hedge bets and throw it away if every 5 years it's payday. And trust me when I tell you, they hedge their bets in that regard. So some more stuff to consider, things to talk about. All right, almost done. Second to last slide right here. Genetics. Genetics are really important things. Anytime we get a species that gets the blue tag, okay? We've effectively decided as a humanity that we've got something that works, and we're going to use it where we see best fit to use it. And it's probably going to work in some capacity. The questions come back with regard to success. Say, for instance, we could actually get blue tag seed on everything we wanted. We'd have, I don't know, 700 blue tag varieties of big sagebrush, maybe. You know, and that's just Tridentata. Not Tridentata, Wyomingensis, or Vosayana. It just one of the big three, right? That's pretty cumbersome. Tie that concept back to, again, the economics of it. How do you get in front of that? How do you have a business model that works? There's some challenges to consider inside of that. All right, it's expensive to research this stuff. How do you know that, Steve? Well, we've done some research. It turns out it's expensive. Perfect, there's life out there. Excellent, all right. So, yeah, research is expensive stuff. As, you know, small industry goes, you have to kind of try to cut the edge. You know, what do they say? You want to be on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge, right? So the native seed industry is always bobbling betwixt the two. And it's one of those deals. You've got to gamble because we can't predict what the next thing is. Here's the irony. If I came forward and said I had 200 pounds of longleaf phlox, I bet I could get my price for it. Not from you, but you know how? So I couldn't get, so the BLM says no, but you know who they don't say no to? They don't say no to BP. They don't say no to Anadarko. They don't say no to Encana. They don't say no to Yates Petroleum. They say you will, because we wrote it in a ROD right here. A ROD is a record of decision for those of you that may not know. I'm sure I'm not talking to that audience, but it's always good for clarity. And so the idea is that there is now a hammer to hold over someone. And where the BLM won't do it on their own account, they have no problem asking private industry to come and deliver, because it's necessary to achieve the goal. Again, keep thinking this through. Where's the market going? We talked about market trends. Who stabilizes the market? The government buy. Who moves the market? The people the government regulates. Maybe. Something to consider, right? Fun, good stuff. Native versus local is a concept. This gets back to genotypes, local genetics. I don't know what this thing is. I've hit it 5 times. All right. So those things are, you know, important things to consider. Another talk, but should be noted. Adaptability. Man, we hear this a lot, especially from the regulating community. So is it adaptable? In other words, is it close enough? How close is it? Can we make it work? If it works, kind of, we should do that. Because any effort is better than no effort. How many times have you heard that as public land managers? How many public land managers are in the room? 3? 4? Wow. Golly. Gosh, is it that boring, really? Because now you've wounded me, actually. All right, so short story long. You know, you have to do what you have to do because something's better than nothing, right? Some action is likely better suited than no action. And that argument's been made numerous times. It's probably going to start being questioned more and more. Is it really true that no action or, you know, some action is really better than no action? There's going to be more conversations around that, especially as we understand more with regard to system functionality, ESDs, geospatial data, and you know, enterprise database systems that allow us to actually ask the real question and have real, you know, data behind it. What a concept. Real data. Let's see. And, you know, please be mindful and wary, just as my own personal soapbox, of the genetic narrowing that happens when we do these selections. Anytime we make an assumption, in my opinion, that something is a fix, it's likely that we're heading down a very dangerous path. And it warrants saying not all solutions come out the way you had hoped. And certainly with natives, that's remarkably true. So genetic narrowing of resource is an important thing to consider when you're actually out there. Maybe a different way of saying it, instead of all of the concepts built around finding the next best thing, the next variety, right, that's the variety I want. Maybe the consideration should be, we want some of all the varieties that might be applicable in the area to promote that diversity. Just a slightly different concept. It's been kicked around, but it's difficult to implement because now you add a layer of complexity to a buy scenario, especially a large buy scenario inside of that concept. So, without further ado, questions, conversation. I love to talk about this stuff. I'm very passionate about native plants. It's what we do. Anybody have a question?
Any questions for Steven? Okay, got Francis here. Yeah, I guess I'm curious about the type of monitoring and how long that goes on in the oil and gas industry. How do you determine success?
It's a great question. The BLM is remarkably confusing. Oh, I can, 2 times. So the question was, how do you determine success on with regard to oil and gas on public surface? And then to follow that through, what types of monitoring do we do? And how is that then interpreted and qualified? Fair enough? All right, check. We've got the question. So the answer then ensues. The way we monitor is both qualitative and quantitative. All right, we use point line intercepts. We actually collect volumes of data. We also use photodoc, which is very important. In the world of oil and gas, the way they build their reclamation, we actually have to understand the soils inside and out. And there was a really cool talk with regard to soils yesterday. So soils are a very important piece. We do a lot of soils mapping, looking, but very small scale, 5 acre chunks at a time. We need to understand the chemistry and the biota of what's going on inside of those soils on surface, and we monitor all of those things when we test. We actually try to restore back to the chemistry and the biota when we go back in for a restoration effort. There are 2 types of restoration concepts. One is short-term, the other is long-term. Short-term is generally tied to SWIP. For those of you that don't know, stormwater prevention, pollution planning, or some iteration therein, SWIP. That is administered by DEQ. They're the ones that are the overlords in the SWIP world. It's a stepping stone. So this builds to how do they qualify success. They need 70% of adjacent vegetative cover to get an NOT, a Notice of Termination status, on surface disturbance. Once they hit that, the DEQ comes out and says, you've stabilized the site. Brilliant. It doesn't have any impact on the bigger picture with regard to BLM surface criteria. We've actually put a publication out. You can find it on CSR's blog if you're interested with regard to the disparity inside of surface disturbance criteria for success. On BLM lands, there is no consistency, and that is a very big problem. It's absolutely zero across the board between offices. Inside of states, outside of states, it doesn't matter. The state lines do not matter. And what that means to say, out of the Pinedale BLM office, everybody familiar with Pinedale, Wyoming? Just south of Pinedale, there's a little development on about 30,000 surface acres called Jonah. And the Jonah field got a lot of press a long time ago in National Geographic. And man, did it blow people up. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but it was a really interesting deal if you want to know the history. All right, all that to say, because of that press and because of that attention, the Pinedale BLM has the most stringent qualifications for surface land disturbance success criteria of any office we work in. And we work everywhere from New Mexico to Canada, all right? All the way over. I don't put boots on the ground in California, no offense, Californians. But other than California, we work there in the West, okay? We're familiar with these offices, these field offices, and what they're asking for. That one's the most unique. And so the disparities are huge. Go to our website and you can see it. It's a compilation, so it's a document we created for clients because they simply didn't understand why when they crossed some arbitrary line, it changed so dramatically. So we put it together for them and showed them why.
Another question? Thank you very much.
Thank you.